good.
All right, it's official. I'm making a video about XRP hitting $100, which means the top is in. Everyone sell your XRP right now. No, but seriously, I've always been really hesitant to make crypto price prediction videos because let's face it, they're almost always wrong. Yet here I am talking about XRP's price potential because it seems a lot of people are really interested in this topic. Now, my personal journey with XRP has actually been kind of interesting. I wasn't a huge fan of it initially, and I even got a lot of pushback from the XRP community for being very skeptical. But as I studied it more, I started to see its potential for the views. Now, before I start, let me just get something out of the way and be fully transparent about the fact that I own 3,681 XRP, which I bought all the way back in 2017. And at today's prices, that's worth anywhere between $8,000 to $10,000, depending on the day. And I understand that for some people, that is a lot of money. And objectively, it is. But in the grand scheme of my investment portfolio, it represents a very small amount, something like 0.1%. It's very small, so I'm not at all shilling or going all in on XRP. That said though, this video is going to be highly speculative. So please, please, please don't take this as financial advice because this is social media. Do your own research and only speculate what you can afford to lose. But in this video, I'm gonna break down what it would take for XRP to reach $100 a coin. I'm gonna look at some of the latest news and adoption trends and some of the big developments like Ripple's integration into SWIFT, the potential for ETFs, and how banks are gonna start to custody crypto and so much more. I'm gonna dive into the XRP ledger, real USD, and even touch on some political developments that could affect XRP's price, but I'm also not going to ignore the risks. I'm gonna talk about some of the criticisms and potential downsides because no investment is perfect without any flaws. So with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for XRP. So let me start with the latest news because there's a lot happening right now. First up, the SEC has removed its civil lawsuit against Ripple from its website. Now, that doesn't mean that the case is over, but it's a sign that legal pressure is easing. Now, I think the real headline, though, is halfway across the world, because according to a recent report from NASDAQ, 80% of Japanese banks are set to embrace XRP for global payments by this year in 2025. And Japan is one of the most technologically advanced and crypto-friendly countries in the world. And if this adoption happens, it's a huge signal for XRP's utility. Now, why this is such a big deal though is because Japan's banking system is huge. And if XRP becomes the go-to bridge currency for cross-border payments, it could see huge demands from the legacy banks. So this is not just speculation, this is actually a real step toward real-world adoption. So that's one major reason why I think the price has a lot of potential to grow. Another huge potential for growth, though, is exchange-traded funds. Some people call them indexes, and they track the theme of stuff. In the stock market, one of the most popular ones is VOO, which represents the top 500 companies in the US. Roman numeral VOO, top 500. And just recently, several major financial institutions have filed their own XRP ETFs, meaning rather than buying XRP directly, you'll be able to buy it through your favorite brokerage app. And with that, you get all the standard investor protections like you would with SIPC. And if approved, this could be huge. Think about what happened to Bitcoin's price after its ETF approval. The price went up because 401k and institutional money all flowed in. And the same thing happened with gold's price when the ETF was approved back in 2004. But I should also mention though, that just because an ETF gets approved does not guarantee price growth. Look at Ethereum. Its price has not moved much since its ETF approval. So while an XRP ETF would be a big step, it's not necessarily a guarantee. But that's okay because there's another huge development, which is Ripple's integration into the SWIFT payment system. Now, for those who don't know, SWIFT is the backbone of the global banking system, handling over $150 trillion in transactions per year. Let me just give you some context for how big that number is, because I don't think it gets mentioned a lot. The entire world's economic output, what we call the global GDP, is about $105 trillion. That means the payment market is 1.4 times bigger than everything every country produces in a year. That's how much money gets exchanged every year. And all the gold that has ever been mined in human history is worth about $12 trillion. So the global payments market is 12.5 times bigger than all the gold in the world. Even the US national debt, which is a ridiculous $36 trillion, is much smaller by comparison. You get the idea. This is why the global payment space is such a big deal for any crypto that competes in this space. The potential is there, but it's also going to take a lot of adoption and innovation to make it happen. Now, Ripple's integration isn't necessarily a replacement for Swift, but it's a step toward modernizing that system. And Ripple's on-demand liquidity, ODL, uses XRP as a bridge currency to make country-to-country payments faster and cheaper. And this is where things get really interesting. If XRP becomes a key player in the global payments market, its utility and demand could skyrocket because more banks and countries would want it. But it's also still very speculative, and we still need to see how it plays out. But we're going to see what happens as early as March 10th this year. This is a huge deal for XRP. Why? Because XRP is ISO 20022 compliant. Now, ISO 20022 is a global messaging standard for financial institutions. It's the language of the banks, and it's the backbone of the new financial system. In fact, it is mandated that all banks speak this language by March 10th this year. And XRP is one of a handful of cryptos that does. If XRP becomes integrated into this system, it could see massive adoption by banks and financial institutions. So even capturing a small fraction of a $150 trillion market could be huge. Now, this is still early days and adoption takes time. There's a lot of moving parts, but the potential is there, and it's one of the biggest reasons why XRP has so many believers. Now let's talk about the XRP ledger and RLUSD, or Real USD, Ripple's stablecoin. The XRPL is Ripple's blockchain that can handle over 1,500 transactions per second with fees as low as $0.0002 per transaction. Compare that to Ethereum, which can handle about 30 transactions a second, or Bitcoin, which handles about 7. XRPL also has a built-in decentralized exchange, which allows users to trade assets directly on the ledger. Now, some people speculate that this could tie in to Larry Fink's vision of the investment world of the future.
I want the SEC to rapidly approve the tokenization of bonds and stocks. That will simplify things, make things easier, and it would save more money for more people. It would bring down the cost of ownership of stock and bonds. Those are the type of financial reforms we need.
Believe it or not, Ripple actually tokenized the first money market fund on the XRPL. And this is a huge deal because it shows a proof of concept that it's possible to put assets that are worth trillions of dollars on the blockchain effectively. Now, this is a can of worms that could be its own separate video, but long story short, imagine some of your favorite stocks trading on the blockchain 24/7 all the time without market closes. That is all transparent, instant. That has a huge total addressable market, what's called TAM. It's worth hundreds of trillions of dollars. That's where BlackRock sees the future of finance going, and that's what Ripple is trying to be a part of. But another huge potential is SAB 121 and Real USD, which is Ripple's stablecoin. Stablecoins like Real USD are meant to stabilize value, and they're usually tied to the US dollar, and that makes them perfect for everyday transactions. That also makes them good for remittances and, of course, DeFi or CeFi applications. Now, by introducing Real USD, Ripple is adding an asset to the XRPL, which could attract more users, more developers, and more institutions. But why this really matters is, number one, because Real USD could work hand in hand with XRP in Ripple's on-demand liquidity product. Now, I know it's really complicated what I'm saying, but here's an example. Imagine there's a payment. It could start in Real USD for stability and then settle in XRP for speed and cost efficiency. And this dual currency approach could make Ripple's payment solution even more appealing over Swift. Remember that $150 trillion market. Now I know it's still a little complicated, so here's a really simple analogy. Imagine a train running on a set of tracks. Now the tracks themselves is the XRP ledger, and what's being transported, these little train cars, are real USD. That's the stablecoin. But in order for the cars to use the tracks, it has to burn XRP as a form of payment. But it's not just payments. Reason number 2 is because it goes hand in hand with the repeal of something called SAB 121, which is an accounting standard that has now changed starting this year. That means banks can now custody or hold your crypto and lend against it. And if real USD plays a part of that, it could also boost the ecosystem by providing the money or liquidity and stability needed for the banks to allow borrowing, lending, and trading. The more activity on XRPL means more demand for XRP to pay transaction fees, which could also drive up its value. The risk, though, is that if real USD, the stablecoin, becomes too dominant, it could overshadow XRP in some use cases. Especially if I'm a country and I just want to buy some oil, I want to send $1 billion, I don't necessarily want to use a volatile currency that could be worth a couple percentage points less by the time it arrives to the other side. So just keep that in mind.
Got it.
But I think the Ripple team probably has solutions like the dual currency example I just showed you. But there's even more interesting news. President Donald Trump is forming a crypto advisory council, and Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse is rumored to be one of the people that could be a part of this Jedi Council. Mr. President Trump has also signed an executive order for what's called a sovereign wealth fund.
It's a very exciting event. We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. I think in a short period of time, we'd have one of the biggest funds.
Now, a sovereign wealth fund is essentially a state-owned investment portfolio that holds things like stocks, bonds, and potentially cryptocurrencies. Now, if XRP were included in such a fund, it would be a huge vote of confidence. Of course, that also means if XRP is included, chances are even higher that Bitcoin would probably be in this fund as well, and maybe even Ethereum. But now let me just tie everything together and let's get into some number theories. Understand that the entire confidence of the crypto market is based on one idea: Bitcoin. Without Bitcoin, whether we like it or not, the market would not exist to the degree that it does today. So let's look at this through the lens of Bitcoin. Because right now, Bitcoin's market dominance is about 60% of all crypto. That's a market cap of roughly $1.9 trillion. XRP's market cap is about 4.5% of that. So what does that mean? Let's fast forward to the year 2030. What does the future look like? A lot of analysts predict that by 2030, Bitcoin would probably be somewhere near $1 million a coin, with a market cap of around $20 trillion, give or take a couple trillion. Now, if XRP maintains that same 4.5% dominance, its price could go up to between $22 to $25 a coin, which is about 10 to 12x from today's prices. That's sort of like a baseline price prediction that's based purely on Bitcoin's success. But what would it actually take for XRP to reach $100 a coin? XRP's market cap would have to be about $5.7 trillion. That's actually pretty doable. That's triple Bitcoin's current market cap. It's possible, but it would take massive adoption, especially by financial institutions and countries. And if all the things I talked about in this video turn out to be more or less realities, then yes, it's possible. But there are also some risks that I want you to consider. At some point in the future, people will take some parts of this video out of context and be like, Andre's pumping XRP. So I think it's really important to pump the brakes and be sensible for just a minute, because as much as there is excitement for countries buying XRP and using it for their own sovereign wealth fund or reserves, remember that countries might prefer an asset that's not tied to any nation. And think about this for yourself. Imagine you're the leader of a country. You want to hold reserve assets, or you want your country to have its own sovereign wealth fund, a portfolio of stonks, right? If crypto is something that you want as a part of this strategy, would you want an asset that is somewhat centralized, in the sense that it has a CEO and is part of a company and is tied to a country you may not like? Or would you want something that is not tied to any countries, that's free from CEOs and free from the rules of a nation and its governing laws? And I think it's at least valid enough to consider. Also, XRP recently experienced a block halt where the ledger stopped processing transactions, and that emphasizes what I said about trust in the system, especially if it requires intervention to fix. But here's what I really want to leave you with, and I want to say this in every crypto price prediction video in the future. Just remember this quote because it's brilliant. I came up with it. At the edge of expectations, assumptions turn into belief. What that means is our expectation of what the price should do is based on our assumptions. And this was true of Bitcoin in 2009. There were people that said someday Bitcoin could be worth $100,000, maybe even millions. People called them crazy, but they weren't crazy. They just made assumptions of assumptions about assumptions of assumptions. And as Bitcoin got older, slowly those assumptions came true, one by one. And the price went from $1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 60, 60 to 100, and now we're here. And now the leap from 100K to 1 million is just 10x, which is still a lot, but not as much as the leap from $2 to $100. That's 50x your money. And that's because for Bitcoin, there's now less assumptions. The story is clear. The less clear it is, the more assumptions we have to make, and the more we can assume the price would go up. And that's where XRP is still today. A lot of what I talked about in this video are incredibly good reasons for the price to go up. But remember, they are assumptions based on assumptions of assumptions about the future. And the farther out we extrapolate into this future and assume that we're right about it, the price gets crazier. But remember, at the edge of expectations, our assumptions turn into belief. The good news is if enough people believe the assumption, it might come true. And that's exactly what happened to Bitcoin. So keep all of this in mind. It's really helped me a lot throughout the years. So if you're going to invest in XRP, do it as part of a diversified portfolio and only with money you can assume to lose. I hope I've made it very clear that this is all highly speculative, but there is also a lot of potential. And if you like my style of teaching, I put together a step-by-step, beginner-friendly guide on how to protect your XRP and your Bitcoin and put them on the blockchain. Now, it's fundamentally the same process between the two. I use Bitcoin as the example, but I can also add XRP. It's over 4 hours long. I think you'll get a ton of value, but as a thank you for making it this far into this very boring YouTube video, you can use coupon code Andre40 to get an additional 40% off at checkout. You can go to stan.store/Andre. I'd love to see you back here next week. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andre. But like you were saying, always do your own research.
So let's check in with Graham.
What's up, you guys? It's Graham here. So have you ever been curious how much money it would actually cost to be able to afford a home like this, or even this, now that prices and mortgage rates are at their all-time highs? Well, wonder no longer, because today we're going to be covering exactly how much income it takes to rent or purchase the typical home in 2025, based on current prices, interest rates, and lender guidelines. Because when you see the final amount and how much money it takes to actually be able to sustain those payments, you're going to be shocked. And not in a good way. Plus, I say all of this as someone who's worked full-time in real estate since 2008 as a real estate agent, investor, landlord, and homeowner. So I'll give you a first-hand experience as to exactly what you could expect, and then at the end of the video, I'll share how much money you need to have to afford something like this, just in case you win the lottery. Although before we start, as usual, if you appreciate videos like this, or even if you just find them helpful, it would mean the world to me if you hit the like button or subscribe. If you haven't done that already, it takes you a split second, it's totally free, and as a thank you for doing that, here's a picture of a kitten. So thanks so much, and also big thank you to Kickoff for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Alright, so when it comes to the cost of home ownership, I've noticed that there's this general mindset that renting is throwing away money, and buying a home is always a good investment. And even though there can be some truth to these statements, it's not the entire picture. So to give you a full understanding of exactly what's involved, let's discuss renting. I've said this before, but there's a saying out there that goes something like, your rent is going to be the most you'll pay for housing every single month, and your mortgage will be the least you'll spend every single month. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, that is extremely true. Anytime you rent, the payment is the payment. That's it. It's super simple. There aren't any surprise city assessments, property tax increases, insurance premiums, or roof repairs that could empty your bank account on a moment's notice. Whereas when you buy, that's just the very beginning. For example, first, when you purchase a home, you're going to have a mortgage. In most cases, this is broken down between a mix of principal and interest, usually amortized over 15 to 30 years, at which point your home is paid off in full. If you have a fixed interest rate, this means your monthly payment's not going to be changing throughout the entire duration of your loan until your home is paid off. And from this perspective, yeah, it's actually pretty similar to renting. Except, unfortunately, this is literally the only cost that is not going to be going a lot higher. Like second, when owning, you're also going to have property taxes. This one is typically based on a percentage of your property's purchase price, and it usually ranges anywhere from 0.4% to more than 2% of the property's assessed value every single year. Third, you also have insurance costs. See, anytime you own a property, a lender requires that you have a comprehensive insurance policy to cover anything that might happen, like a freak of nature fire, because California wants to save a declining population of smeltfish. And just like property taxes, this amount readjusts every single year based on the risk likelihood of your area and number of claims in your location. Or they could just drop you altogether if you're in a high-risk location. Fourth, you then also have repairs. This might include replacing an AC unit, fixing a water heater, replacing a roof, spraying for termites, and all the other fun stuff that comes along with home ownership. In terms of how much this costs, some people use the 1% rule, which says you'll spend 1% of your property's value every single year on repairs, while others use the $1 rule, which says you'll spend $1 for every square foot of livable space every year. But finally, fifth, you have other. Now this one is somewhat hard to calculate, but it usually includes things like HOA costs, landscape, upgrades, routine cleaning, and every other aspect of homeownership that you never really think of until you check your bank account at the end of the year and have a heart attack. Because of that, the cost of owning is usually substantially higher than the cost of renting, and as a result, that'll impact what you're able to afford. So if you're curious how much money you need to make to afford the typical home in 2025 here in the United States, here's your answer. To start with the basics, we'll get the simplest part out of the way. Renting. Since this is a fixed cost, the general rule of thumb is that your rent shouldn't exceed 30% of your gross income before taxes. This means if you make $40,000 a year, your rent shouldn't exceed $1,000 a month. If you make $80,000 a year, your rent should be capped at $2,000 a month. If you make $160,000 a year, it's $4,000 a month. You get the idea. However, this rule of thumb was apparently created during a 1969 amendment to public housing before record student loan debt, $700 car payments, and the Hawk-Tuah coin. So because of that, there could be a few more accurate guidelines that are adjusted for today's cost of living, like the 50-30-20 rule, which suggests that you spend no more than 50% of your take-home pay after taxes on needs like housing, food, and transportation, 30% for wants like clothing, travel, and hobbies, and 20% for additional savings and debt repayment. With this, your entire financial picture is taken into consideration with a bit of savings mixed in as well, although this probably means you're going to spend a lot less than 30% of your income on housing, which could be a bit of a challenge during a time when everything costs a lot of money. This is why I personally take the approach of what's called backwards budgeting, where you add up all of your fixed, non-negotiable costs that you can't live without, like debt repayment, transportation, food, healthcare, and so on, include a buffer of 10 to 15% for savings, include another buffer of 10% for wants, and then you could spend whatever is left over on housing. For some people, this might be 15%, for others it could be 25%, but I like that this gets you in the habit of saving and investing first, and then spending what's left over second. And this is really going to help you if one day you want to buy a house or a Lamborghini. Or I guess if you just want a really simple answer, ideally you should keep your rent to under 20% of your gross take-home pay before taxes if you want to prioritize saving. That means if you want to rent this house for $2,800 a month, you should be bringing in anywhere from $110,000 to $170,000. Or what about this home for $4,000 a month? Ideally, you should be making anywhere from $140,000 to $240,000 a year. Or this house for $10,000 a month, you should be making anywhere from $360,000 to $600,000 a year. After that, when it comes to buying a home, there's a few guidelines that experts recommend you follow, and the first is what's known as the 28% rule. This states that you should spend no more than 28% of your gross income on your mortgage payment, which includes your property taxes and insurance. To calculate this, just take your monthly income, multiply that by 0.28, and there you go. That's how much you should be spending on housing. Now, because of that, under this formula, if you make $5,000 a month, your housing cost should not exceed $1,400, which is enough to afford a home in a $205,000 price point with 20% down at a 7% interest rate. Of course, if you're disappointed that a $60,000 salary is barely enough to afford a $200,000 home once you've already saved up a $40,000 down payment, you're not alone. And if you want something to blame other than decades of underbuilding, zoning restrictions, inflation, and gentrification, it's interest rates. Like, just consider that when mortgage rates were down at 3%, a $60,000 income was enough to afford a home in the $315,000 price range. But now, with costs having increased, the final number is significantly lower today in 2025. That's why under the 28% rule, you would need to earn $145,000 a year to comfortably afford a $500,000 home. You would need to make $215,000 a year for a $750,000 home. And you would need to make $285,000 to purchase a $1 million home at a 7% interest rate, assuming a 20% down payment, not including maintenance, repairs, or property insurance increases. This also means that if you make the median household income in the United States of $80,000 a year, under this rule, you could not afford the median priced home in the United States, which would cost $427,000, or $2,850 a month with $105,000 down. In fact, your monthly payment would be $1,000 higher than the 28% rule would allow you to purchase. However, keep in mind that these are just guidelines, and if you want to bump up your price range, there are lenders out there that will give you significantly more money than you might expect. So you're going to want to hear this. To start, when it comes to getting a mortgage from a bank or lender, the first thing they're going to do is run your credit. This shows them how you've handled your debts in the past, if you've always paid on time as agreed, and if you could responsibly handle a monthly payment. The way I see it, this is the single most influential aspect when it comes to getting a competitive mortgage at a low interest rate. And the first thing you're going to want to do is this. Before you go and apply with a lender, go and check your credit. And if it's lower than you expected, it's crucial to begin making improvements as soon as possible. All right, now in terms of how much home you could afford, before we talk about how much money a lender will give you, we need to talk about the golden metric known as the 30-33 rule. With this, there are three main points to follow, with the first being no more than 30% of your gross income should go towards your mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. Just like the last strategy, this means that if you make $72,000 a year, your monthly payment would be limited to $1,800 a month, which would buy you something in the $260,000 price range. If you make $150,000 a year, you could afford something in the $550,000 range, and at $300,000 a year, you could comfortably afford a $1.1 million house. Now, the second 30% rule is to have at least 30% of the property's value saved up in cash. Why? Well, this strategy recommends that you make at least a 20% down payment and keep 10% on the sidelines as a buffer for anything that might come up. Now, personally, I tend to agree with this one because a 20% down payment usually gets you the most favorable interest rates and terms with a lender. It lowers your monthly payment, it gives you a bit of a buffer in the event the market goes down, and having cash on the sidelines is a good thing just in case something eventually breaks. And finally, the three part of the rule suggests that you do not buy a home that costs more than 3 times your annual income. This means if you make $75,000 a year, your price point should be $225,000. If you make $100,000 a year, that's a $300,000 home, and so on. To me, the 30-33 rule is probably one of the safest, most conservative approaches to home ownership because it really ensures that you don't take on too much house too soon before you could really afford it. However, in terms of what a lender will give you and how much house you could realistically buy if you want to max yourself out, here's the answer, because it's pretty surprising. In terms of how much home you could realistically buy, lenders really only care about two things: income and debt. That's it. The income part is fairly straightforward. How much money do you make every month? Do you have stable employment? And do you have 1 to 2 years of tax returns? If the answer to that is yes, Congratulations, you got half of it done. However, the debt part is a little bit more complicated. See, anytime you qualify for a loan, lenders look at what's called your debt-to-income ratio, which calculates how much money you have left over after expenses. In this case, most lenders want a debt-to-income ratio no higher than 45%, which means no more than 45% of your gross income after expenses could go towards all things housing, including your mortgage. As a quick example of this, if you make $8,000 a month, a lender will want no more than $3,600 a month going towards all of your debts. And in this case, if you were to have a $500 student loan payment, $700 car payment, and a $100 credit card payment, you would have $2,300 left over for all things housing, which would buy you a home in the $335,000 price point, assuming you put 20% down. Now, since lenders use debt as a way of qualifying payments, things like auto loans, student loans, and credit card payments work against you in terms of what a lender is willing to loan. So if you have no other debts and you make that $8,000 a month, all $3,600 could go towards housing, which in that case would buy you something in the $530,000 price range with, of course, 20% down. Does this mean it's a good idea to go and spend 5 times your annual income to buy a house? Probably not, but there are plenty of lenders out there that will give it to you. And this also means that if you make $12,000 a month, you could theoretically afford an $800,000 home. If you want to buy a $1.2 million home, you'd need to make about $18,000 a month, and at $2 million, you're looking at $30,000 a month. Of course, these are all just rough estimates, in addition to also having a good credit score and down payment. But if you want my advice on how you could best go about doing this, here's what I think. Personally, I'd first take a look at the overall cost of buying versus renting and just ask yourself, what makes more sense financially? Like right now, you might be surprised to learn that at today's interest rates and prices, renting is cheaper than buying in all 50 states. In fact, it's said that across the United States, it costs households on average 38% more to buy than rent. To make matters worse, the premium for home ownership over renting is the highest it's ever been in history. Look, as a landlord and homeowner myself, unless I find a great deal, get a really low interest rate, or I'm super confident an area is going to be going up in value over the next 5 to 7 years, I think renting is the underappreciated choice. And if patience is on your side, you may as well just wait until you find a great deal or a home you plan to live in for at least 10 to 20 years, and then buy it if you could comfortably afford it. Otherwise, I hate to say it, there's little financial reason to buy a house these days, assuming you could save a lot of money on rent. Like as an example, take this home in Las Vegas. You would be paying $3,500 a month for your mortgage, property taxes, and insurance, not including maintenance, after saving up a $100,000 down payment, or you could rent an identical home down the street for $2,750 a month. Now, I'm sure some people will say, but Graham, when you buy a house, you're going to be building equity, so that's not fair. Okay, well, in the first year, you'd be paying down your mortgage by $4,100, or about $344 a month, which effectively takes your payment from $3,500 down to $3,150 a month. And now, owning a home is still $400 a month more expensive. Not to mention, if you have $100,000 saved up as a down payment, you could just put that in a treasury making 4.5%, and all of a sudden, that $4,500 more than offsets the money you would be gaining by paying down the mortgage. Separate from that, if you want a really quick life hack to determine how much a property will cost you, just look at the 9.35% rule. Essentially, the cost of a property is really going to consist of a 7% mortgage, 1.1% average property tax, 1% for repairs and maintenance, and 0.25% for everything else, giving you a total of 9.35%. This means you could take a $500,000 home, calculate 9.35% of that, and all of a sudden, you could see it'll cost you $46,750 a year, or $3,895 a month, if you wanted to own it. To me, this is the greatest life hack rule of thumb ever, because in a few seconds, you could easily calculate the cost of home ownership and compare it with the cost of renting. For example, take a look at this home in Los Angeles for $650,000. At 9.35%, you could see it'll cost you $60,000 a year or $5,000 a month, versus this home nearby for $3,500 a month. Anyway, in terms of whether it's better to buy or rent, the honest answer is there's a lot of variables that play into this, like interest rates, inventory, the cost of building, insurance rates, and so on. But overall, here's why renting could be better. First, if you plan to stay in your home for less than 7 years, then renting tends to be the cheaper option. That's because when you move and sell, you're not going to have to come out of pocket for things like escrow fees, commissions, title charges, and miscellaneous expenses that usually reduce reduce your take-home selling price by about 6%. That's why generally, the longer you own your home for, the easier it is to spread these charges over a period of 10 to 20 years. But in the short term, you're unlikely to recoup it anytime soon. Second, renting is better if you could make a significantly higher return from your down payment. For example, if you're running a business and tying up $100,000 in a property results in you making a lot less money, that could be a case against buying. We're also at a bit of a tipping point where a 7% mortgage is about on pace with what you could earn in the stock market, so it might make sense to have your money not tied up in a house. Third, this might sound self-explanatory, but renting could also be better if you believe the market's going to stay flat or even go down in the short term. As of now, housing prices have completely defied the odds by continuing to go higher even despite higher interest rates, but this isn't guaranteed to happen over the next 10 years. Fourth, renting could also be better if you want to have very little upfront cost or responsibility. Like outside of fixing items that you directly damage, a landlord's going to be responsible for all the property tax and insurance increases, repairs, or anything else that goes wrong with the home. You, as the tenant, just pay one fixed cost and everything is taken care of for you. If you have a good landlord, of course. And finally, fifth, renting could be better if you value flexibility. The fact is, with renting, you could pick up and leave as soon as your lease agreement is over. You could upgrade, downgrade, move as often as you want. And with a lot of rentals on the market these days, you have quite a bit of leverage as a tenant if you have good references and a quick move-in. Of course, the downside to renting is, number one, you're going to be at the mercy of the landlord. This means if a landlord wants to suddenly raise your rent for no reason at all, even if it's above market rate, just because they can, there's nothing stopping them. Two, your rental cost is not going to be locked in, so you're somewhat at the whims of the market. Even though this could work in your favor, like right now when there's a lot of rentals on the market and a surplus of inventory, rental prices could end up going up higher in the future, even more than that of owning a home. And three, you have no way to customize your home and make it yours when you move in. This means no painting the walls crazy colors, adding in your own deck, doing any remodels, because at the end of the day, it's not your home, it's somebody else's. Although just remember, this isn't the entire picture, and even though renting can be great in the short term, there are some serious advantages to buying. First of all, long term, owning still tends to be the better choice. Even though the market could very well trade sideways or go down in the short term, long term, housing is still proven to be a very resilient investment, and the longer you plan to hold on to it for, the more likely you are to come out ahead profitable. Now second, by owning, you're able to lock in your monthly mortgage until your home is eventually paid off. Now even though things like property taxes, insurance, and repairs can fluctuate and go up over time, at least your core fixed monthly expense isn't going anywhere, and you could better plan ahead because of that. And third, when you buy a house, there is a psychological benefit that it's yours. If you want and value stability, that could be a huge reason to buy a house, but it does come at a cost at usually significantly higher monthly payments. So after watching this, if you're gonna go and buy a house, at least do me this favor. Please shop around your interest rate to find the lowest price. Then negotiate with the seller to get a good deal. Don't be afraid of doing some cosmetic repairs yourself to make it your perfect home, and only purchase something that you plan to keep at least 10 years. Yes, owning is expensive right now, but through diligent saving, research, and patience, it's absolutely doable, especially if you know upfront exactly how much it's going to cost. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering how much it'll cost you every single month to own a home like this, for $195 million, here's your answer. Now, even though realistically, whoever buys this house is probably just going to pay for it outright in cash, for fun, let's assume they put 20% down. That's $39 million. They're also going to get a $156 million mortgage, which works out to just over $1 million a month. You'd also have property taxes at a rate of 1.25%, which works out to an additional $203,000 a month. Insurance would easily be another $30,000 a month. We could throw in another $20,000 a month for maintenance, repairs, and landscape, and that brings your total cost to $1,253,000 every single month, with $39 million down. Using the 30-33 rule, you would need to be making a minimum of $4.2 million a month or $50 million a year to be able to afford something like this. Although, again, let's be real. Most likely, the person who's buying this is going to be rich enough just to send a wire transfer and be done with it. So in terms of the actual cost, if you have to ask, you can't yet afford it. So with that said, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, big thank you to Kickoff for sponsoring this video. The link is down below in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy it.
Okay, we'll check in with Forbes now. See what they got to say.
President Donald Trump's lawsuit against X, formerly known as Twitter, will be settled by the Elon Musk-owned platform, according to the Wall Street Journal, with X agreeing to pay $10 million to resolve the suit based around censorship claims levied by Trump in 2021. Trump sued Twitter, Facebook, and Google 4 years ago, alleging the companies censored him in the wake of his defensive comments in response to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Twitter cited 2 tweets from Trump as the reasons for his ban. One said the, quote, American patriots who voted for him would, quote, not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. Trump said in another post he would not attend former President Joe Biden's inauguration. The posts were made 2 days after the January 6th Capitol attack, with Twitter assessing they could be interpreted as supporting the rioters and as encouraging those potentially considering violent acts at the inauguration. Trump's attorneys considered dropping the lawsuit due to Musk's stance as a Trump ally before and after the presidential election, according to the Journal, which cited unnamed people familiar with the matter. Musk, who spoke alongside Trump in the Oval Office on Tuesday, put more than $200 million into Trump's presidential campaign last year. X's settlement follows a $25 million settlement agreed to by Meta to resolve a suit around Trump's censorship claims. Trump's Facebook and Instagram accounts were also suspended following the Capitol attack. The former president's accounts have since been reinstated across all platforms, with Musk and Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg growing closer to Trump since his election. X did not immediately respond to Forbes' request for comment.
Interesting.
For more on this story, check out Antonio Pequeño's article linked in the description.